Well, welcome. What a great turnout. What we're going to do, I'm just going to talk for 10 quick minutes, kind of lay the groundwork, and then we're going to have some quick comments from our panelists and then jump into the questions that you have about dating. What a great panel. I can't imagine two better couples to join me and my wife, Noreen, and I'll introduce them in a second. They need no introduction. The book, Marriage Forecasting, I applied it to marriage, but it can be applied to dating or family relationships or evangelism or roommate relationships. Communication climates applies to every concept you can really think of. Have you ever thought about why some conversations go well and some do not go well? I think of Proverbs 18:21 that says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. And we've all had that issue where we sit down with somebody and we want to say to them, let's talk this issue out. And it suddenly goes really south very quickly. And you sit there and you realize, what in the world just happened that this conversation is not going well? And if you're dating somebody, you all know that there's topics you talk about that tend not to go very well. And so communication theorists have been very interested what causes conversations either to go really well or to kind of deteriorate. And very quickly, I can't assume that everybody was in chapel, so very quickly, when we talk about communication climates, this is what we talk about. It's an overarching sense of value and satisfaction individuals feel as they interact with each other and go about daily activities with each other. So it's really the backdrop of your relationship. And in a dating relationship, it's whether you feel good as you daily interact with that particular person. Do you feel affirmed? Do you feel like this is a healthy relationship? We call that a communication climate. And my wife and I speak at marriage conferences, and at one conference, a couple walked up to us, and you can just tell they were not doing well. And this guy walks up to me, and he just says to me, would it kill her to watch NASCAR with me? And I just kind of looked at him and I said, well, you just want her to, yeah, would it just kill her to do that? And I asked him, what does she like to do? I said, before I answer your question, can I just ask what she likes to do? And the way he said it, he said, antiquing. And I said, you know what? I'd go antiquing with her. And he looked at me like, you're an idiot. Why would I do that? And that has everything to do with the communication climate. Is that you show appreciation towards that person and they'll show appreciation back to you. And the backdrop of a communication climate cannot be ignored. It's always present. Now, communication theorists have speculated what makes up a communication climate. And this is what we've come up with. First, what are the expectations that you have in your dating relationship? Do you expect that person to pay for the meal? Do you expect that person to open the door? Do you expect that person to call you a certain pet name that's important to you? What are your expectations, both spoken and unspoken? Ladies, if you look at your boyfriend and you say, I want you to be the spiritual leader, what exactly does that mean? You have to define that, but some of you think, well, I shouldn't have to define that. I'm at Biola, I'm dating a man, he should know what a spiritual, yeah, there we go with these words again, get me in trouble. He should know what it means to be a spiritual leader, but that has to be interpreted. You have a very clear idea of what a spiritual leader is, and as men, we walk right into your expectations. So you have expectations about romance, you have expectations about what affirmation is, and men, we have expectations. I bet you every man in this room would say, I want to be respected. That's an expectation. But then how do you define that? What communicates respect to you? So expectations, a huge part of communication climates. Next is acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is any indication that you are struggling to understand the emotional content of what the other person is saying. To acknowledge their presence. And you know, this gets me in trouble with Noreen because I really am a sports junkie and I have 3 boys who I've socialized to be sports junkies, you know. So Noreen will be talking to me and guys, the music, the theme song to Sports Center comes on, right? My wife could be saying the most intimate thing to me, like, you know, I just realized as a teenage girl I was abducted by aliens, you know? And I will hear the theme music to Sports Center and I'll be looking right at her and mentally I'm saying, don't look, don't look. And it doesn't even matter what it is. It could be Yiddish shuffleboarding. And it's, come on, Jan, get the red one. It's like... So in this relationship, do you feel acknowledged? And what communicates to you that that person is giving you his or her undivided attention? You feel like your perspective is fully appreciated and fully acknowledged, however you want to interpret it. And one of the best things we can do is obviously learn each other's definitions as we're in a dating relationship. Now, I hope you can see how this applies to roommate relationships, family relationships, and even evangelism when we're learning the worldview of another person. Next would be, or how to acknowledge would be, let the other person know that he or she, what they have said, has made an impression on you. Doesn't mean you have to agree. Just saying, you've caused me to think about and to even feel in some ways your perspective. Doesn't mean I agree with it necessarily, but I don't approach it with this type of detached neutrality, which causes disconfirmation. Next is this issue of trust. Communication scholars would say trust is the single most important thing of any communication climate. Mahatma Gandhi said the moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, everything he does becomes tainted. So do I trust you? Do I trust you that you have my intentions at heart? Do I trust you that you're looking out for me? Do I trust you that what you tell me I can believe and is in fact truthful? We break this down into two areas. One, we call it self-trust. Yeah, I want to be trusted by my wife, trusted by my colleagues, trusted by my kids. But self-trust asks the penetrating question, are you a trustworthy person though? Very important to ask that question, almost like King David in Psalm 131. God, search my heart and reveal to me the intentions of my heart. So Plato said, if you wanted to do a test to see if a person was trustworthy, give them a ring that when they put that ring on, it makes them invisible. Then Plato said, now go and watch what they do. So guys, for us, it could be things like, hey, we say we're opposed to pornography or sexually explicit material, but Plato would say it's okay to say that, but when you put the ring on, what then do you do knowing you can't be caught because you're invisible? So Plato was very much interested in what you do in private is a great indicator of what you'll do in public. So self-trust is first. Second is what we call relational trust. And that is that we really can't count on each other. You're a person of your word. I can count on you emotionally. Very important that we trust each other in any dating relationship. Evaluating trust, we could ask the very simple question, I trust the values my significant other talks about in public are the ones he or she lives out in private. Now, why is this important at Biola? Because we all know the talk at Biola. C.S. Lewis said when you became a Christian, you were like a parrot. You learned the phrases to say. So here at Biola, we all can talk a good game. We know exactly how to talk about our spirituality. And the great danger about being at Biola is the assumption that just because you're here, that other person is in fact spiritual. No, you need to have a long dating track record. I'm a huge proponent of long courtship before engagement to see that person's track record. So yeah, if I asked you how important is the Word of God, my goodness, with Erik Thoennes sitting behind me, what are you going to say? You're going to say, the Word of God is incredibly important. Easy to say, but how much do you actually read it, meditate on it, pore over it? So ladies, what he says is completely irrelevant. Set it aside. Don't even listen to what he says. It only matters what he does. Guys, set aside how she describes herself. It's irrelevant. It only matters what she does in daily life. And the only way you're going to be able to tell that is to see the track record that we're creating virtually every day. So set aside what people say. It's only what they do that I think is very important as they live out convictions. Last, the fourth element is a communication climate is commitment. Julia Wood would say the hallmark of commitment is the assumption of a future. So every time you have an argument, do you kind of think the relationship is unstable? Do you think we're over? Is this drama, high drama? It's like, how committed are we, and how committed should you be is a very important question to ask in any dating relationship. No doubt you're going to judge that based on investments. How much are you investing into the relationship, and do you feel like you're investing equally? Now, those are the 4 elements of the communication climate. Very quickly in closing, let me mention 2 things that tend to really impact every communication climate. First is conflict. All of you have conflict in a dating relationship. You'll have conflict with parents, roommates, and no doubt in a dating relationship. And very quickly, we define conflict in communication theory as an expressed struggle between at least 2 interdependent parties who perceive incompatible goals, scarce rewards, and interference from the other party in achieving their goals. So 2 things from that definition very quickly. If a couple comes up to me and Noreen and says, "We don't argue," that is not necessarily a positive. I would want to know, why don't you argue? And if Noreen and I do premarital counseling, which we do on occasion, we will look at a couple and we'll say, "I want you to describe an argument, not a disagreement. I told you a vanilla latte with soy milk and you got me." It's like, no, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a disagreement in which you were passionate and you really had an argument. Describe that for me. Are you afraid to have an argument? Are you afraid to have a disagreement? Now, let me tell you about the ironic thing about that. If you conversely tell me that you have a lot of arguments, but we're loving each other unconditionally, we're working through our arguments, I would want to look at you and say, is this really the kind of relationship you want, that you're arguing this much, you have this much conflict? I mean, right now you're getting the best that person has to offer, right now, the best, because you're courting each other. So if a lot of conflict is arising, I would want to say, are you content with that kind of climate? Is that what you want? I would be concerned if you had no conflict. I'd be concerned if you had a lot of conflict. Next is forgiveness. We forgive another when we let go of the anger, resentment, blame, and other toxic feelings we have towards the offender. Listen, as Christians, we are to forgive each other. One person described marriage as the union of 2 good forgivers. I think there's a lot of truth to that. So we need to be able to forgive because of what Ephesians says, "Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you." So I would never say to you, become committed to a person who can't apologize. Never marry a person who can't look at you in the eyes and say, "That was my fault," with no verbal eraser of a but. Yeah, that was my fault, but when you do this, that makes me... No, that's a verbal eraser. You need to be committed to a person who can look you right in the eyes and say, "That was my bad, I'm sorry." Okay, very important. But if you're having to ask for forgiveness all the time in the relationship, I would say, now why is that happening? Is that the kind of climate you want? Because your future is right now in many different ways when it comes to courting and engagement and marriage. I love what Peter Kreeft said. There is never any problem, misery, or evil in any human relationship that cannot be changed or healed if only 2 things are present: forgiveness and determination. All the rest is nuts and bolts. So yes, you're to be determined to love a person, but you have to evaluate whether this is the relationship in which you want to love a person unconditionally. You're evaluating that person. Now, when you get married, we have a totally different conversation. I look at you and I say, no, you are to love that person unconditionally. But now, dating, I want to say, do you think you could love that person unconditionally for the rest of your life? That's what courtship is, evaluating. And then lastly, I close the book with the fact that you have a communication climate with God. C.S. Lewis said, human beings can't make one another really happy for long. You cannot love a fellow creature fully till you love God. Some of you are in a relationship right now and you shouldn't be. Why? It's too important to you. That relationship is fulfilling a function that only God wants to fulfill. Right? Your hearts are restless, Augustine says, until they find peace in God, not in a relationship. So some of you are too desperate to be in a relationship, and God wants to, quite frankly, teach you that your ultimate happiness and identity ought to rest in God, not in a relationship. So some of you are single right now, and God says that's a perfect place to be. Some of you are in a relationship right now, and God is saying, I think you need to get out of that relationship because you're looking towards that to fulfill a function that only I should fulfill. Some of you only feel good about yourselves when you're in a dating relationship. And God wants to say, no, I want you to feel good about yourself because you're my child. Very important that we learn to love God and have him love us. Then we can accept the imperfect love of another human being. And so you have a communication climate with God that's made up of commitment, trust, expectations, and acknowledgement, just like with a human being. Work on that relationship, and if that is healthy and sound, then you'll be a better boyfriend or girlfriend, a better lover of human beings when God has filled you with his divine, unconditional, grace-based love. Okay, so very quickly, that's the book, okay? Like speed reading, okay? So, when they asked me to do this, I thought of two couples we just love being around, me and my wife, Noreen. It's incredibly important to be around couples that encourage your marriage, encourage you to be the kind of couple you want to be. And I can't think of better couples than the couples behind me, and they really need no introduction, so very quickly, Doctors Erik and Donna Thoennes. Erik is a huge part of why I'm here, and Donna. We had a great conversation with them 7 years ago. We've known them for a very long time, have greatly admired them as a couple, their convictions. New friends are Dr. Grace, who's a vice president and teaches psychology, has become a great friend. But the really neat thing about the Graces is the fact that he and his wife, Alisa, speak at marriage retreats and conferences all across the country. In fact, this weekend they're going to speak at a conference. And it's great to see a couple who not only knows the theory of a good marriage, but actually lives it out. And we love to hang out with these couples and listen to them and laugh a lot. And so we would love to now sit in these chairs, and we're going to offer some quick comments about what you just heard about the book Marriage Forecasting, and then it's ollie oxen free. You ask any question you want to. Grace is going to offer a couple of observations.
All right. Well, this is an opportunity for you in this kind of university, in a place like this, to pick up material that when we travel around other schools just don't have access to. So let me just say this. As I read Tim's book, we spent a lot of time together over the last couple of years, and Alisa and I, and then Noreen and Tim have spent time, and as they've talked about when this book started in his mind, and when they were talking about it together, we had an opportunity to visit with them about it, and they put in there some principles that are universal. They're applied in a way that you can understand and recognize. So we have just valued the opportunity to hear this. We're going to take it with us on our different retreats that we do, simply because it hits principles that are timely and that are important. So as you get an opportunity, one of the things I want you to look for is what this has implications in general for all relationships that you have, because what we have found is it comes at it in a way that's it's very readable, but it also is very applicable. So I think the thing that we looked at in this book together that really kind of gave us encouragement was the idea that people can find hope in it. They can find a way in which they can set up a relationship. So if you're dating right now and you're looking for those principles and those standards, those things that you want to look at and say, are we doing okay? Are there some things we should be doing differently? This gives those kind of expectations, those hopes of what you should be looking for. Do not start looking for those kinds of things where we oftentimes get them in our culture. Man, you go out to movies and you find all of these kinds of things that are occurring I think they seep into us, and they help us kind of start forming what a relationship should be like, or how you should meet someone, and how you should fall in love and find your soulmate and become whole when you find a person. And those themes permeate our culture, and I think this book does just the opposite. It tells you why that's so dangerous. And so that's what we value, Tim, I think, in all of this is that opportunity to say that is really going down a path that can lead to some bad and unfortunately some very short marriages. If you know this, marriages right now, you've heard of the 7-year itch? Well, basically now research is showing it's somewhere around 2.5 years that most marriages end up breaking up. 7-year itches are no longer 7 years. They're now breaking up at 2.5, 3 years. And we think it has a lot to do with people buying the wrong understanding of what a relationship should be based on. And so one of the things we valued then is just recognizing what the foundation should be, how trust and commitment and expectations should be there and talked about. So. So what else, man?
Did I introduce you, Noreen? I don't think I did. This is my wife, Noreen. And one of the great joys, and I'm sure Erik and Chris would jump in, is that to be able to find a partner that you can minister with. Not just supports your ministry, which is great, but Noreen and I have been, even when we were dating, we were speaking in sororities about defining dating and what's a biblical view of dating. And that happened when we were dating, and now, by God's grace, we've been speaking at marriage conferences, and we're humbled by it, but it's so fun to have a spouse that we do ministry together, and we complement each other, and Noreen gets to shine, and so it's really great to have a wife that you can minister with.
I was tempted to say, wow, what's the key to a good marriage? And I really honestly immediately thought, well, marry a wife like Donna and your marriage will be great, is what I thought. That's honestly what I thought. That sort of covers so many issues and it makes up for so many of my blunders.
Sorry, there's only one of me.
That's true. But I would just like to highlight a couple things Dr. Muehlhoff said. The first is when he was basically talking about integrity. You know, he's taught me these terms, backstage and front stage lives, where you got a front stage life, but what he was saying was your backstage life is really who you are deep down. And boy, those integrity questions are just massive. Who you are in your heart, in your character, before the Lord is where your relationships start. If you try to have healthy relationships without first and foremost paying attention to your soul and your heart and your character, then it's all a sham anyway. Even if you can practice certain skills that help you communicate well and come across a certain way, it's all a house of cards if there isn't character to be at the core of it. And so fundamental discipleship, following Jesus and having the work of the Spirit transforming your character to be like Christ, so you have the integrity he was talking about, and no matter what you say, is the rock bottom of all good relationships. And then that trust can develop, because even if you're a lunkhead like I often am, you hope that your wife is able to recognize, okay, even though he takes major diversions from the trajectory of his life, there is a trajectory submitting to the lordship of Christ. And you can bank on that, and you don't have to be overly concerned when there is a failure, because you see a posture in a direction that you can depend on. And so that sort of trust is grounded in someone's character. So, you know, guys say, oh, I want to find the ideal woman, and I'll often say, you know what, why don't you just work on being the kind of guy she'd be attracted to in the first place at all, right? You want to find the ideal woman. What makes you think she'll like you, right? So in the meantime, you know, be working on being the man or the woman that you hope that ideal person will be attracted to at all. And that means hard soul work. And you know, I love that you're here, and it's so important we pay attention to our relationships and glean the massive importance from this. But it's interesting, I was just thinking, I wonder if we had a week where we all sought to get better at prayer and fasting. You know, would there be this turnout, right? Well, in some ways, if we focus on those sorts of things, our relationships will be so much better just starting there. So So I'm actually a little concerned it's packed out as much as it is in light of maybe more fundamental issues that then enable you to take these nuggets of wisdom and really apply them in effective ways. That's why it was so important what he was saying about just look, you talk all you want, I'm going to watch your life. And that is so important. And to have enough time with someone to be able to see a track record and a pattern and a trajectory in one way or the other. It's amazing. I think especially women hold out all this hope that he'll change so dramatically once we have a commitment on the table. And it just, no. You see a track record for a while before you make that kind of commitment.
Can I just add one? I agree with everything that Dr. Thoennes is saying, but I want to tell you why I'm encouraged that it's packed out.
I am too. I'm not saying.
But
I am.
because I do think it goes so hand in hand, and that's why, even as Tim was talking about, what is your communication climate like with the Lord? Because that is foundational. But the reason I'm encouraged that you would come out for something like this is that we have seen, and I know both of you, these couples have as well, is the devastation that comes when you get into relationships you shouldn't be in. You stay in relationships, you make commitments, you base relationships on the wrong things, and you don't recognize maybe what some of the problems are. You try to have the relationships fill spots they shouldn't fill. And that comes back to your relationship with the Lord, but adding on the context of dating relationships and romantic relationships. I think because I've seen it tank so many people and have them lose their ministry and cause them to struggle, that I'm encouraged that people would pack out to hear this kind of stuff.
I think even looking at that same issue, Noreen, is not only seeing the devastation of people that have made some wrong decisions and gone at it the wrong way for maybe the wrong reasons, is being so encouraged when you look at people like Tim and Noreen, Erik and Donna, and you see what it can be like when you do it the right way. That is awesome. Chris and I both grew up in homes that were not ideal. Chris's parents broke up when he was about in 7th grade. Mine divorced shortly after we were married. They had stayed together just until my sister and I were up and out of the house. And so we came into our relationship with a lot of ideas of what not to do. But we didn't have a lot of great role models at home, but where we had it was at church. And Chris was real involved in the Navigators. That's how he came to the Lord. And we began to watch those couples that were doing it the right way. And we began to look at them and think, oh, it can be done. It gave us a lot of hope, and it gave us a lot of encouragement, and it gave us a lot of courage and determination to make right choices and to make good, healthy choices in our relationship. And I can honestly say that 23 years down the road, now that we've been married, it feels really good to be on this side of it and say, I'm glad we did it the way we did it, instead of the opposite way of, man, I wish we had done it differently.
I just want to affirm what Alisa's saying, and as I think about our marriage, we've been married 22 years, so we're kind of in the middle of both of these couples. But that neither Erik nor I grew up with an example at home of the kind of marriage that pleases the Lord and that we would want to emulate. And so we have that in common with the Graces. And I just want to take that one step further and just say that our God wants us to have marriages that honor Him. And that even though you may have come from a broken home or a home where there's nothing but conflict, that doesn't necessarily have to become your story. And I just think it's really important that we realize that our God is all about transforming us and making us into sons and daughters who glorify His name, have harmony within our relationships, have communication that honors the other person. And just because you didn't have that in your home, it does not mean that you have to become that. And I sometimes think that we get that message, that we hear, well, if you were treated this way, you're going to become that. And that's not how our God works. He transforms us. He gives us fresh starts. He forgives us of sin, and he, by the Holy Spirit, gives us victory over sin and helps us to have dating relationships and marriages that are pleasing to him. So have hope.
And let me go back to something Dr. Thoennes, Erik said, that you need to see the track record. You need to see a long track record. I just applied for tenure, and Biola basically said, hey, before you apply for tenure, what's the waiting period? How long do they want you to wait?
5 years.
Yeah, a minimum of 5. We want to see you for 5 years in action before we're even willing to consider granting you tenure, because we want a track record to see what you do in 5 years. Is this indicative? Anybody can have a great 1 year or even 2 years. They're looking and saying we want 5 years and or 6 or 7 years. So when you're dating at an early age of like 19, 20, you are going to base the future on a snapshot of that person. So sometimes I scare my students in my class because they're like the front stage, backstage thing. They're like, well, how do I know when I really see their backstage? How do I know this isn't a performance? Because they know what a Christian man or a woman's supposed to act like, and they're doing it because they're courting me. And the only answer I have is one, discernment from the Lord, but second, time is your friend. A long, steady track record with bumps in the road, sure. But I'm not a fan of early marriage. There's exceptions. The Graces are one of them. But everybody thinks they're an exception, and that's the problem. So I do think a long courtship, time is on your side. I don't think there's a huge reason to rush into it.
And I'd like to add to the time for a track record, but there are also certain contexts where you really get to see someone. And so, thank you, Tim. Thank you. Where there are, so I think if you overdo face-to-face time, just staring across a table over a ice cream soda, and as if you still drink those, and so over a frappa cappuccino, and that costs you $10 and has 1,200 calories. Now, so you're staring across. If you do all this face-to-face time, I don't think you're seeing vital aspects of a person until you're serving side by side in a local church context with annoying kids who are driving you crazy, and where you really get, I didn't like how he just showed all kinds of impatience to that kid. Is that he would treat children we have? And suddenly you're seeing things you don't see at the Eagle's Nest, right? They just don't come out very much. And so you see each other in a ministry context, in a real context where you're with different kinds of people. And so there's so much face-to-face emphasis. In some ways, you get to know somebody better at a church work day than sitting across from each other at the Eagle's Nest. So, or Starbucks if you want to really upscale it. So, if you're really creative. And so serve. And that's why I was just talking to a couple we know who met each other at camp. Serving together at camp, watching each other be tired and sick and impatient. And boy, a lot comes out in ministry context that don't come out when you're just focusing on each other all the time.
Do men like women to make
Yes.
the first move?
We love them a lot.
Thank you.
A lot.
I'm being thorough. I'm being very thorough. Do men like women to make the first move? Is it okay for women to make the first move?
What kind of move are you talking about?
Like involuntary twitches.
She so went there, didn't she?
Do we think it's okay? Do we think it's okay for a woman at Biola to ask a man out? Do we think that's okay? The guys.
Yeah, I do think men would like that, but I think it's mostly because they're gutless.
Chris, Alisa, do you think it's okay? Can a woman ask a guy out here at Biola? Is that okay?
Well, I have to say that, well, we have both a son and a daughter. Our son Drew's a freshman here, and our daughter Natalie's a senior in high school. She'll be here next fall, Lord willing. And I have to say, I encourage my daughter not to do it on a regular basis. You know, if it's something like a guy rag, get your roommate a date, if it's like the Sadie Hawkins dance, sure. But I'm a firm believer in if he wants to go out with you, he will call you. That's what I tell my daughter. Dad, what would you tell Natalie?
No, I whatever she says, I agree with. That's how it works right there. I learned that lesson early. Yes, ma'am.
Don't you believe it?
You know, when I was in high school, I called up Jill Morehouse. Maybe Jill will watch this podcast, I don't know. But I called up Jill Morehouse, and I said, hey, Jill, it's Erik, how you doing? She said, good. And I said, are you doing anything tonight? And she said, yeah, I'm not a good planner. And I said, do anything tonight? And she said, no. And I said, well, you want to go to a movie? And here's what she said. No. I mean, no, nothing, not an excuse. Even a lame excuse would have been great, right? Rearrange my sock drawer tonight, can't do it, anything, right? But she said no, and there was this dead silence. And so I said, oh, okay, I'll tell Chris, because he was wondering. A friend of mine. Now, I'm ashamed to admit that, but the way I view a manly responsibility in relationships, I think it's the man's job to stick your neck out so it gets cut off. There's an indignity about being told no that a man should endure. There's something I like about it. And when a guy says, man, I asked her out and she just shot me down, I said, way to go, man, way to be. I'm serious, I feel that way. I feel like, way to stick your neck out, buddy. And that's manly of you to do that. You know, I see these guys like, I'm not asking her out until the odds are so obviously stacked in my favor that she'll never say no, right? Like I've talked to 15 of her friends and they've guaranteed she'll say yes, so now I'll ask, right? What is that? That's just you give me a look like, oh, all right.
But I would say, passion duly noted, is that a guy rad, I mean a guy rad, yeah. Certain things, certain organized things, I would say, yeah, it's fine. But I wouldn't want it to be a pattern that's happening in the relationship. But I think certain organized things, yeah, I think ladies would be fine to initiate and do stuff like that. But I'd be hesitant if it became a pattern.
Yeah, I just think it's wise to think about the fact that from the very beginning of your friendship, you're beginning to set patterns that will continue. And so, do you want to set the pattern that the woman is taking the lead? Because I think that that could easily continue, and I don't think that that's the best pattern for a marriage.
Go ahead. Yes, go for it.
Well, I was just going to say, just to kind of follow up on what Donna was saying, I guess I would be concerned if it became the pattern. If it's an occasional thing or an initiation here or there, but if it becomes the pattern in your relationship that the woman is initiating, the guy is responding, if that's going to set really maybe some unhealthy patterns in the relationship where the man either does not take any kind of leadership that he should take, or feels intimidated to do it, or backs off, or even gives up that opportunity because he doesn't have to.
Yeah, I think it also, it's not like it's wrong or bad. Right. It's not like it's going to make for a bad relationship or a bad marriage. I think what it is there are just some things that are different about us. And just one of the things we have found when we work with couples is that there seems to be some patterns that are unhealthy, especially when it comes to marriage, that may be related. Let me just take a stab at it this way. in about 85% of the 85% of the couples in which there's major conflict and one of the persons in the relationship does not respond during conflict in a way that is good, that is, they kind of withdraw or they run or hide or whatever, they just simply don't engage, in 85% of the cases, it's the man. And so what that means is there are some patterns that can start to develop that if that's kind of the tendency to be a little bit more passive about this, it causes problems because men can kind of like, you know, I'm not as good at talking about things. I don't want to deal with this. Or so that makes sense. It could portend possible things that we do see in couples that if there are, now, by the way, there are a lot of guys, we happen to be on the opposite side of this. When there's an issue of conflict, I kind of approach her a lot and she's like, get away, you know, kind of thing. But she's a lot better at it now, but so we are different in that regard. But I'm just saying that in general, one of the tendencies that we see is that men tend to kind of, during conflict, like, I don't want to talk about this, leave me alone, they withdraw, and that becomes an issue or a problem. And so I think it's just kind of like a possible pattern that you might want to look for. Does that make sense? Huh. Made that up too. That was complete. No, not really. That was good.
Which goes to the expectation part of the communication climate is what's your expectation of the role the man will have or the woman will have in the dating relationship, and there should be agreement on what those roles are. The old adage that opposites attract is really not true. Research shows it's compatibility that makes for a really healthy relationship. Compatibility on many fronts. Now, there can be differences in preferences and things, but deep down, your theological beliefs, your view of marriage, there needs to be compatibility. And I think when it comes to roles, to say, okay, I think it was fine for you to initiate, but I'm uncomfortable with that being the pattern. And so to have that kind of conversation, I think down the road to say, what is the role of the man in this relationship? What's the role of the woman? I'm not telling you what that should be. We've had to work that out. But you need to be on the same page eventually when it comes to that. And patterns can be established pretty quickly if you're not attentive.
And I said, I think there's a design in the way God made men and women and the way we're supposed to relate to one another, where a man has a responsibility to initiate and take leadership and have at times a sense of protectiveness for women and opening doors, I think, is one of the cultural ways we express that. And you know, when the Titanic was going down and everybody said, it's women and children first, everybody knows that's right. And any man who says, well, I don't buy that, should be thrown overboard, and we all know that, right? There's something right about that, and it's in the design of right from the creation. What happened? What got messed up in the garden? Well, Eve took initiation, and who'd God come looking for? Adam. Hey, buddy, what's up? She, exactly. That's the problem, right? So yeah, I do think there's a design in the way God made us, and it doesn't mean that there's a rigid, overly detailed way of how this has to look, and there are different personalities that come into the play. But I do think there's a God-designed way men and women are supposed to relate that we need to work out the details of in our relationships.
I want to remind you guys, if you have questions, I have a mic. You just have to give me a minute to get there. And if you could kind of clear the aisleways. I'd love to crowd surf, but it's probably against Biola contract. So if we could clear some aisleways so I can get to people. And if you don't want to talk, we have a question box if you want to write it down and be anonymous. We have that too.
Here's the question. Is there one out there?
What's against Biola contract? I missed that. Is what we're doing against Biola contract right now? You're not supposed to.
Crowd surfing.
I've never done that. It's always looked so invasive.
That's because it's against contract.
What's that?
That's because it's against contract.
Oh, is it?
That's.
I know what it is. I've seen pictures.
Go, Chris.
Did you have a question?
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious. You had mentioned, I think it was either Dr. Muehlhoff or Dr. Thoennes, you were talking about how important it is to just be discerning with the cultural influences and the movies and everything. And so when I think about just reading a book called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas, he mentions just this historical human history timeline of how it's a very new thing, courting. In the historical timeline, arranged marriages is really the thing that happened the most up until most recently, right? And so it's interesting to think kind of this new development of entitlement and just this kind of American dream, and obviously all the influences we have from the media. So where does that line that we draw personally, just as Christians, beginning as individuals and as Christians first and foremost, that we need to draw just like with that intake? So Facebook and movies and everyone and all these different things kind of intruding on our worldview of what relationships is. Where's that line? And how do we discern those things, and how much of those things are we taking into our expectations for a relationship?
Great question,
Yeah, if you haven't read the book, by the way, it's a great one. Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. His whole philosophy is this, that marriages aren't designed to make us happy, they're designed to make us holy. That God uses a relationship like this. It's a great premise, isn't it? And he uses that idea is that she has access, God has access through her to places that no one else does. And so maybe the whole intent of marriage isn't for pleasure, which is really where Hollywood gets this whole thing messed up, right? Where people who have decided that this is I'm now complete. Haven't you heard that by someone? I'm now whole. I now feel this person makes me. Well, what happens, a few days, months later when you don't feel happy, and maybe something is wrong, and you're like, well, then I made a wrong choice or a wrong decision. So I'm not answering your question. I think it's a good question. I'm just giving the idea of the premise of the book. So, Tim, what's the answer to
Well, it reminded me of a study that was done at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, where they studied American romance movies and then surveyed the effect that it had on Americans' view of marriage. And Kimberly Johnson, the lead researcher, basically said this: it makes Americans impatient. They think that love blossoms very quickly, and they get caught up in a quickly forming, passionate love. And other researchers have argued it takes, in a marriage, anywhere from 7 to 10 years to find the rhythm of the marriage. So in a date, again, this is back to my thing about time with dating, is to expect this thing to explode like you see in an hour-and-a-half movie, or a sitcom, or an hour, a 50-minute primetime show, is what she is saying is spoiling your view of love. And she would say, and I would agree that that's infatuation, not love. And love is the hard stuff that takes time to develop. So I'm not a proponent of love at first sight. I probably would agree with lust at first sight, infatuation at first sight, but love, that takes time to cultivate, and we're incredibly impatient as a culture. We shout at a microwave to hurry up, okay? So I think that works against us, and in 2.5 years it flames out, right? And because it flames out because you're like, hey, I'm 2.5 years into this. It's more work than I thought. And I never got that when my married friends said that to me. My married friends would say to me, yeah, Tim, marriage is great, but it's a lot of work. That didn't make sense to me until you get married and you realize it's great, but it's work. No, you're not alone. Well, I'm not going to answer that. But to say marriage isn't work, it just isn't realistic. That's just not it. And then throw in toddlers and a career, and you're off to the races, and you're tired spiritually, emotionally, physically, and people call it quits very quickly. Like, I'm going to go find another relationship that's less work. I'll get more out of it, but it's going to be less work. And I think that's the American fantasy when it comes to committed relationships.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, obviously the culture that we all live in, those kind of concepts just permeate the culture. But to go back even to your question, we need to be aware of sort of where are we getting our input? And if we're spending all our time receiving and living in and sort of letting those types of messages just soak into us, then it's going to have a big impact. But are we aware of sort of counteracting it with our own relationship with the Lord, with our own time in the Word, with our time in a local church, and serving together, and taking advantage of the opportunities you have at Biola and at other places, and relationships with other people that are wanting to do it well and wanting to glorify the Lord. And so sometimes just taking a look at how am I using my time? What am I allowing the input to be into my life? What am I soaking myself in? Because, there are some things we can do to counteract some of those cultural messages. And can I make one more one more comment on the book too. We love the book. We love Gary Thomas's book, Sacred Marriage. And that whole idea of that marriage is more about making you holy than it is happy. But the interesting thing I think I found in our relationship is the better we're doing with the Lord, the better we do with each other. And so happiness, although it's not the goal, like I don't set out the goal of, I want you to make me happy, although it's nice if it happens, but that it is a very natural side effect. It's a byproduct. So I just want to make it clear that we're not saying, marriage is about making you holy and miserable. That's, that's not, because usually the byproduct of pursuing holiness in your marriage will be a happiness and a deeper sense of commitment and an ability to trust and an ability to communicate. So just so that's not misunderstood.
If you could hang out with these people, you can see we're happy. We like each other.
But hey, let me read this question. Let me read this question and then take a little bit of an issue with it. It says, what qualities are attractive to guys? And I honestly think that's the wrong question. I think, ladies, find out what the Lord wants you to be, find out the kind of person you want to be, and then find a guy who finds that attractive. Honestly, because I teach a gender class, and right now we're taking a look at physically, what does the culture find attractive? And ladies, most times men find attractive what is not within your grasp because it is abnormally thin, and most women do not look what would be the cover of the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition. That's a professional model who that is her one job, is to look that way, and her body type is such that some of you, because of how God has created you, you cannot be that body type.
And she's been airbrushed.
And she's been airbrushed.
She doesn't even exist.
With all the perfection.
Yeah, she doesn't even exist.
She doesn't exist.
No, seriously. That's a great point.
And,
because there's nothing original on her body that you're seeing on that swimsuit cover.
Yeah. So, find a person that looks at you and thinks, man, I just think you're attractive. I'm just really attracted to you. And that's really great when you find a person that says, I think.
And realize how saturated with these cultural values we are. I mean, most of you just watched the Super Bowl. A third of the ads were objectifying to women. It should tick you off and not sit there and say, oh, that was funny. You should have revulsion against it and see, okay, I will not be sucked into this way of viewing women and what I value and appreciate. And it's not enough to say I value character, but that's not what gets my attention. You need to ask God to change your attitude and heart where you really do value holiness more than what Madison Avenue today is defining as beauty. This is true for men too. I just read last week that, do you know, because of the economic trials and struggles in our culture, that modeling agencies are realizing what women are finding attractive is changing, actually. And they said, here's the sentence. It said, the attractive male is shifting, and so they're looking for models accordingly. It's shifting from a skinny skater rat to a guy who actually looks like he could hold down a job. They're shifting. Is that amazing? So the economy is now shifting what a woman finds attractive. I want a guy who's actually somewhat competent in something. And so And in the 40s, the ideal male had a briefcase and a fedora and a trench coat, and he didn't have this prepubescent body with no hair, so you shave it and look like the David, you know. And so it's amazing how we get sucked into Madison Avenue's latest version of what's attractive and then want a wife accordingly. Yeah. Instead of going to the scriptures and saying, I want a husband or a wife who's godly, who loves the Lord, and you know, whether she's blonde or he's this high, this tall, is just absurd to be orienting things around that sort of thing. We need a radical shift in our thinking and ask God to transform us, or we're going to be as shallow as everybody else.
Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. I read an article a couple weeks ago, and I was just wondering your opinion on it. The article was by Dr. Henry Cloud and was titled, Dating is not about marriage. And its thesis is, dating is as much about learning what you need and want, and how you need to grow and change, as it is about finding the right person. I'll repeat that. Dating is as much about learning what you need and want and how you need to grow and change as it is about finding the right person. What is your opinion on that, may I ask?
I agree with that. I'm fine with that. I think I'm not a kiss dating goodbye proponent. I think casual dating, properly defined, not jumping in and out of committed relationships, but I think casual dating is a great way to find out what kind of personality types I work well with, what kind of personality types I don't work well with. So I think dating does not have to be, I'm dating you with the view of, could I marry you? I'm dating to find out more about you, I'm getting to know you, I'm getting to know myself in the process. Now, is this moving towards commitment? It could be, but it doesn't always have to be. Now, that's my opinion of dating. I think we've over-spiritualized it, put too much pressure on dating, and that's why guys are a little freaked out to date, because if we date broadly, we get a label very quickly. And so ladies, in some ways, the fact that men are gun-shy to ask you out is a product of your own making, because we can't casually ask out women, because then we get labeled as, well, yeah, but I thought you were dating her. I thought you were, and it's like, well, I'm kind of getting to know. Now, I'm not talking about jumping in and out of committed relationships, but I'm saying dating ought to be a way of learning what kind of personality types and communication climates I work well with and what I don't work well with. Now, that's probably controversial, but I buy what Cloud says. I like it.
But I think that only works if you're really careful about what these relationships look like. So you don't want to be a serial dater
especially if you're putting lips on people, because that sabotages the whole thing.
Great
That's
point.
what I was just
Great
going to
point.
say. Yeah, but because it depends on what are you doing in these relationships, right? If you're just going for a frappa cappuccino, was that your word? To Starbucks, and you're talking about your classes and what you're learning, and that's one thing, right? If you are physically involved, if you are bearing your soul, if you are having deep, intimate talks, and you are bonding with that person, okay, then these repeated dating relationships are detrimental to you. So I think what Henry Cloud is, and I haven't read the book, Daniel, but my guess is that what he's talking about is a relationship that builds you up spiritually, and one in which you treat that other person as someone else's potential spouse. And you don't touch them, and you don't say things you shouldn't say, and you don't talk about a future when you have no idea if that person's going to be in your future, but you are respectful and you treat her like your sister. Then it can be that. But I don't want to just say, oh yeah, date around, because unfortunately, we're not all as careful as we should be in those relationships.
You don't mean don't touch them. You mean just touch them.
They know what I mean.
You can, right.
Well, and Don and I are in complete agreement. Properly defined, dating can work. properly defined, but we are so quick to go past what we call escalators. I mean, now, because we hate ambiguity, so we move past that at light speed, and I do think the physical messes it up. So now you're leaving broken heart after broken heart. And that is not what Cloud's talking about, and that's not what I'm talking about, is dating properly defined. Now, that's going to take maturity, and quite frankly, some of you are not mature enough to do what I think Cloud is advocating at this stage of your life.
The thing that Donna mentioned too, in addition to the physical involvement, because I would say in my definition, our definition of casual dating, which I'm going to insert that into what you read from Henry Cloud's article, is that casual dating involves no physical romantic contact and limited emotional. That just as important as, keeping your lips to yourself is not talking about a future, not making commitments, not even getting too deep emotionally and talking about, sort of those deep, dark things in your heart and sharing them too quickly, because that causes emotional ties. So casual dating as a way to get to know someone beyond a friendship, it's a little bit different than going out in a group, but it does help you to get to know someone. If you honor them and respect them, helps you get to know yourself, and I think there is great value in that.
That idea that it's highly likely who you're dating right now, if you're dating someone, you're not going to get married. And so statistically, you're probably going to break up, probably before the end of the semester. So, exam time. The Lord wants me to have space. It's coming, just wait. So you're probably, it's highly likely you are dating someone else's spouse right now. And that means you need to think about how you want some brother out there who's dating your future wife to be treating her, and then just apply that to yourself. I think in a basic way, that's do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So you think of, wow, some brother out there is dating my future wife right now. I'd like to mail him a list of instructions for how to do this well, right? And so here's your goal. Date in a way where you will get invited to her wedding, to some other guy. And then you'll have the ability at the reception to go up to him and say, brother, I did right by you. You owe me, man. You owe me. Say that. I was going to bring you a wedding gift, but you owe me one, because your wife's more godly because she hung out with me. She's a better wife now for you because she hung out with me. And then go up to her father and say the same thing. That you owe me because I was good to your daughter. You make your goal, get invited to the person you're dating's wedding to somebody else. And it's not going to rob your relationship of romance or the kind of what you want from it. It'll add to it the kind of integrity that Muehlhoff was talking about.
Okay, do you guys have another handwritten question you want to do before we go over here? I want to make sure those don't get missed.
Yeah, we've got do you have any more in your, Chris? Are they good?
Are they good questions?
Well, this is an interesting question because we actually get variations of it. But it says, my best friend is a guy, but I just started dating my boyfriend. Is it okay to have a best friend who is a male?
What would that even look like?
What do you guys think? No,
go ahead. What do you? We have thoughts on it.
Go, Alisa.
Well, I think if you're, so the question is it okay to have a guy that's your best friend while you're dating someone else? I think if it's a casual dating relationship that you're in, I don't see a big problem with that. It goes into, I can honestly say in marriage, I think that's a lot easier defined. I would not be comfortable with my husband's best friend being a woman while we're being married. And so, other than myself. But, and I think that I can honestly say he would not be comfortable with, he doesn't even like it when I talk about old boyfriends from elementary school, He's just like, okay, new subject, let's move on.
I know their numbers, man. I'm stalking them. You treated her right.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So I don't know. That's a really good question. I'm not sure if I have.
Yeah, I think it's the level of the
opinion.
relationship. My stab at it is it just depends on where you're at in the relationship. to me, any kind of relationship that you have with somebody of the opposite sex that's healthy, a close friend, is a good thing. I think in general it is. I think you learn a lot about each other, as Eric was saying, and others, that you just get an opportunity to see what you like, dislike. And so I guess what you have to do as that relationship proceeds is just have a conversation with the person that you're dating. And if they feel uncomfortable because you spend more time and you're more emotionally connected, I think really what it is you just have to kind of determine that together as a couple. I don't think that you can always say it's always bad or always good. And if that person comes to you and you have a good relationship with them and they're saying, you know what, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable when you always like them and hang out with them and want to do that, I think you need to start exploring that. So I guess I would just say it depends maybe on your level of dating and where that's at. Certainly, as Alisa said, we've seen too many couples that are married that do have other friends that are of opposite sex, and as what she's saying is, man, then you got all kinds of problems and issues there. And some people want to say, no, but I really like this other person just as a friend. Well, there are some issues there, and it seems almost absurd to think that somebody would do that, but they do. So it has a lot to do with your level of relationship and where you're at.
Well, because you think about how does your romance start? You know, if you end up marrying your best friend, your so-called best friend, then when you keep that door open in that area, especially when you're married, you make yourself very vulnerable to stepping outside the bounds of your marriage and making yourself vulnerable to an affair. That's how they get started. Nobody walks into work every day thinking, hey, you know what, I'm going to go find somebody and have an affair today. That's not how it happens. Satan is so much more devious and crafty and subtle than that he's going to worm his way in and into a friendship and progress it in a way that is unhealthy and inappropriate and within a context of a friendship oftentimes. So you really have to be careful, especially the more serious your relationship gets. What do you think, Noreen?
Well, I totally agree. And the other thing that would be a red flag in this case, so even to start it at this level when you're talking about just dating, would be, if your best friend is a guy, that's one thing, but do you have some good friends that are girls? Because I do think it's really, really important to be investing in same-sex friendships. That when you leave Biola, you will have a group of girls or a group of guys that are lifelong friends, those friendships will continue to grow. So I'm not totally comfortable with, the best friend being a guy and dating somebody. I can see where that might be okay, but I would really be concerned if there aren't an equal or greater number of close girlfriends in your life.
Okay, I got another question for you.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Like us here at students at Biola, I think we're still, or I guess students in general, are still maturing. And I think when we get into a relationship, we can get our hearts so involved in it that our minds stop functioning so well. And we see our parents as interrupters of our relationship rather than as wise ones that are guiding us in finding that partner for our life. And so I was just wanted to know what your view is on parents and how they should be involved in our relationships.
Well, that has so much to do with the parents, doesn't it? No matter who your parents are, and Muehlhoff's one of the world's leading experts on relationships with parents and honoring them, even when they're hard maybe to honor. So we always need to do that, but the degree to which you'll go to them for your shaping wisdom has so much to do with who the parents are.
And you were talking about dating, not in marriage, yeah? As a parent, I want to be really involved.
Oh, I'm going on every date with my daughters, which don't start till they're 18, so I will be present. In the back seat. How you guys doing? Got any more fries up there? I'm gonna be there.
Yeah, but really, Eric's kind of kidding, I think. But I really do want to be involved. I mean, our 10-year-old, talks about someday when she gets to date, and I want her to talk to me about the boys she has crushes on and what she's thinking. And what she's doing when she goes out with these boys she has crushes on. But yeah,
I'll tell you exactly what she's doing, because I will. Just ask me. I'll come home with a full report.
No, but often when I talk to students about their relationships, one of the first questions I ask them is, what do your parents think? Have your parents met him? What do they think of him? What kind of concerns do they have? Because generally speaking, I think most of you can trust your parents' input in your life, and they know you better than anyone else. This is not true across the board, of course. But if your parents are godly, they love you and want to protect you more than anyone else in the world. And so that protection may be a little bit more zealous than you wish it was, but I think that you can trust them. And I also think that you need to honor them. I mean, the Bible says we need to honor our parents.
And your church family needs to be involved as well. Tell these guys the first question you ask a woman when she says, "I think I might have met the one." What do you ask them about the guy?
There are two questions that I ask young women about men that they feel they're growing to love. One is, what?
No, what are the questions I asked?
Yeah. Does he submit to older men in his life? Does he submit to the authority, the people in authority that God has put in his life? And usually that means, what I mean by that is he in intentional discipleship relationship with an older man or men? Or is he just a lone ranger who criticizes everybody in authority over him? He criticizes every chapel speaker, every teacher, his pastor's sermon, and right on down the line.
And he's going to plant a church because he knows how it's to be done.
Or does he submit to other men? Because I tell women, I'll tell you women, that I do not think that you want to be yoked to a man for the next 60 years who will not accept input from other men in his life. Mm-hmm. Because if God is calling you as a wife to follow his lead, you want to make sure that he is humble enough to ask for help and to allow other people to speak into his life. So that's one question. The second question that I ask women is this man really concerned about your holiness? Is he more concerned about your holiness than you are? Because you do not want to enter a relationship with a man where you are the one saying, "Oh, I'm afraid this might be wrong. I'm afraid this might be too far." You do not want to be the one who has to put on the brakes all the time. You want him to be protecting your honor and concerned about your holiness. 60 years is a long time to be committed to a person, and you want to make sure that he's going to yes, sir, you can cut me off.
So how do we get the answer to Donna's questions is time, a track record. Those are great questions. How do you get the answers? Well, time, observation and time.
And maybe asking your parents what they see.
Good,
You know, asking your parents what do you see in this man and or woman, and perhaps your parents might need time to see the track record too. They might need to spend time with that person.
The divorce rate in the United States is actually going down a little bit, and the reason it's going down from a purely pragmatic standpoint is people are waiting a little bit longer to get married. That's it. We're not talking years, we're talking a year or two, because that maturity level from 22 to 23, 23 to 24 is huge when it comes to a person's personal maturity. So, generally speaking, I would advocate that right around 25, 26 would be a great year to get married. Are there exceptions? Absolutely, there are exceptions. But we have a divorce culture today that bears out. We're not exactly knocking it out of the ballpark as Americans when it comes to marriage. So maturity is always a good thing, and I think time, generally speaking, is always on your side. Where's the fire? What's the rush?
You know, Dr. Muehlhoff and I have talked a lot about this, and we generally agree. We do disagree a little bit in that he's saying pragmatically, we really have extended adolescence into the early 30s. And so very often we are just, in our culture, especially I will say men, are not mature enough to really take on this responsibility. And so his solution is wait, push it out. Now I don't think that's God's ideal. I think that's a pragmatic sort of, urgency. We don't want failed marriages, so let's push it out. How about, though, rather than just saying let's keep pushing it out until we're mature enough, how about we grow up and actually be the kind of people at 23 who are able to be married because we devoted ourselves to the kind of Christian maturity that enables us to be able to do this challenging thing
Which
at a
takes
younger
time.
age.
Which takes time.
But I mean, the simple fact that by the time you're 30, yeah. Good job, man. It's just too good.
What are you doing?
They're trying to be cooler than us.
Look, by the time you're 30, your fertility is plummeting. Look, I'm serious about that. When you think of God's design for things, and the fall's affected all that to some degree, but really, so what we're saying is because our society's so immature, wait until your fertility's plummeting before you get married. I know. Rather, let's actually work on growing up so we'll be able to have a good marriage when we're 22. Instead of just saying, adolescence is getting older, and adolescence is going to continue until you're 40 before long, and so let's just keep pushing it. No, let's actually grow up. Maybe that's a better solution.
Okay,
And we've talked about that. We could argue right now if you'd like to talk.
We're cutting Dr. Thoennes off for a moment. We've got 3 more questions, and then I'm gonna let you guys get out of here, and then you're free to ask questions. But I've got 3 more for you if you're up for it.
Okay.
I would definitely say there are difficulties to being a woman, but it seems like it's got to be rough to be a guy with the whole spiritual leader expectation set out there, because we hear it talked about and discussed, but we less often hear what that looks like in day-to-day life and how that looks in reality in just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday interactions with people. So I kind of want to just hear what you guys say about that. Like, what does being a spiritual leader look like
On a daily
for
basis.
guys?
I would say this. I think that for us, it simply means, there's a lot of different answers to this. For me, it's marked by an openness and a sensitivity to hearing God's voice, to knowing that He's there and that He's present. And am I seeking after Him in all of the different ways? So spiritual authority means, in some respects, or maturity in this regard for me, it has to do with this. Am I prepared and willing to allow God in and then to leave my life one in which others can speak into it and see that? So you could think of the obvious answer, right? Seeking the Lord, reading it and staying in His Word, and I think those are critical. But it's also marked by others recognizing and seeing that by that I mean in our marriage, recognizing that like we were simply called to model what this is like. When the idea that in Ephesians 5, where Paul talks a little bit about the idea that he compares a marriage relationship to Christ and the church, he uses the word, this is a mystery, which is another way, the Greek word is for astonishment. It means an open mouth, that's an amazing thing. And so what that requires of the man is really something that's very powerful, and that is, am I willing to allow God to speak into my heart, but then do I also expect and talk with my wife? Do I then model that in front of her and say, Elise, we need to really consider, what does God want us to do here? It means me treating her and asking her this question, Lisa, what should we do? How should we do this? Pray with us. And it's not me going, man, this is what God told me to do. This is what we're going to go do now go do it. It's saying, Lisa, how can we do this together? What do you think? Help me to know. I want to hear what God has to say, and He could be speaking to us, speaking to you. Help me to know, and let's just get on our knees and pray. So it's that kind of idea. That's kind of the first thing that I sense, but you guys go ahead.
Ladies, what sort of leadership do you find encouraging and most helpful? What does that look like?
We should have cleared this with him before you asked that question, Eric.
I don't think Donna will have a hard time answering this question.
I don't think
Noreen.
I
think she'll be right off the top of her head.
Eric, you must have told Donna on the way here how to answer that question. That's what you. Here's how you answer it.
So what does it look like? How does that play out on a day-to-day basis? Well, when I think of Chris being not only my spiritual leader, but the spiritual leader in our family and with our children, I think about our conversation, I guess, around the dinner table. And the very first thing he'll do as we all sit down for dinner is he'll say, okay, everybody, as we say the blessing, let's just all go around and let's talk about one thing that we're thankful to God for today in our day.
Good job, Chris.
And so everybody else take their turn.
Wow, that was awesome.
That fires me up. It does. It does.
I think about a conversation with our 17-year-old daughter as we're talking about dating issues with her. And I hear her dad take the lead in talking about Nat, to be praying about where God would have you to be in your relationship. What you need to be working on your own spiritual relationship with the Lord. You and God be tight. You and God be doing business every day before you even start looking at that relationship. Or you need to be praying and asking God, what is His will? And talking about the will for the life. Gosh, Dad, what does God want me to be when I grow up? Where should I go? Well, you know what? And He'll take the lead in leading them spiritually. I'll get through with some big project at work or a speaking engagement, and the first thing, when he knows I finish at 11:30, at 11:40, as I'm getting in the car, I have a text from him that said, hey, I prayed for you today. How did it go? That's being the spiritual leader. It's those little things. It's the things when I'm not at my best. When I'm, maybe ticked at somebody and I'm feeling upset and really angry about something, and I'll say, wasn't that really unfair? Wasn't that just stunk that somebody did that? And he'll come alongside me and validate my feelings, but at the same time, he'll help me from a perspective of how something perhaps helped him at work. At a different time, he'll say, something really bad happened today, and God is really working on my attitude about it. I just really had to pray to be humble about this and that. And I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I would have been so mad. I would have flipped my lid. I wouldn't have yelled or screamed at somebody. But I watch how he reacts. I watch what his responses are. And I'm humbled by it because I know deep down in my heart, mine wouldn't be there. And so it's that iron sharpening iron. It's that encouragement, that unspoken encouragement of Lise, pay attention to your walk with the Lord and where you are, because it's this important. And I'm doing it, and this is how I see it play out in his life. And I see it, and that's what I want. That's what I want in my relationship with the Lord, and how I interact with other people, how I treat other people, how I treat our children, how I respond to the Lord personally, is I actually watch him live his own relationship out every day publicly in our family. And it spurs me to be better, to do better, to do.
That's one of the first things that I was thinking about too, is what does it look like on a day-to-day basis to be a spiritual leader? That the first thing is, that Tim needs to have a vital relationship with the Lord himself as an individual, because otherwise, where is he leading to, and what is the source of his leadership? And so the first thing that encourages me is that Tim pursues the Lord himself. And his time in the Word, and his time with other godly men, and his time in study, and really pursuing those kind of things, just as an individual, apart from me and apart from our family, is what enables him then to more naturally step into that leadership role, because it's just an overflow. These are the things that are important to him. So these are the things that he'll talk to our boys about, or bring up in our relationship, or know that, these are the things I want to initiate and help see them develop. So, the first step to spiritual leadership is a solid personal walk with the Lord.
That makes me think of a saying, Noreen, that you can only take someone as far as you've gone yourself. You can only take someone as far as you've gone yourself. And so that right there speaks volumes of what Noreen is, the point that you're making. Is if you want to take your family there, you want to take your wife there, you want to take your children there at some point in life, you got to be there first.
I fully agree with everything that Alisa and Noreen said, and I would add that I think a man's commitments, Erik's commitments are a way that he leads. So I think from the time when we first got married, that there was just no question that church was going to be a real priority in our marriage, in our family. That giving was going to be a priority, that service was going to be a priority, because all of these things were really important to him, and he wasn't going to waver on these things. These things were going to become hallmarks in our marriage, and in that way, he took leadership. And in addition to all the ways that the other women have mentioned, but I feel like Erik's convictions set the trajectory really for our family life. And I also want to say that part of being a good leader is being a good listener and taking input. So when I say that Erik's convictions set the trajectory, that doesn't mean he says, we're going in this direction, Donna, get in line. It's never been like that, because he asks, he listens, we figure things out together about our future and how we're going to handle certain situations. So part of being a good leader is being sensitive to those you're leading. Yeah.
Last night, Donna made this wonderful Valentine's dinner for our girls, and she cut cucumbers like hearts. It was just this beautiful. She lit candles and did all these things for the girls. And then as we're going to the table, she said, do you have something you want to say to the girls in light of Valentine's Day? I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. I should seize this moment, shouldn't I? Yeah. And so she just sort of handed me off this, all right, come on, big boy, get it done. She didn't say that, but that's how I heard it. And so just because you're the leader doesn't mean a good wife doesn't at times say, it might be a good time to lead right now, because we need that. But let me say this, I don't get the impression, I don't think that taking responsibility as a man and actually women looking to men to be responsible and take initiative awaits marriage. Now, obviously the personal nature of it, the direct nature of it, obviously goes through the roof once you start getting into a committed relationship. But every man on this campus should walk around with a sense, the only advice I think is really so directly applicable to dating in the Bible is when Paul says to Timothy, treat the older women as mothers and the younger women as sisters in absolute purity. So there's this sense of care. And, in the Bible, leaders, who are leaders? The servants of all, the ones who seek to serve first and foremost and lay down their lives if need be. And so my family knows if somebody breaks in the house, even if Donna's a judo expert, I'm not going to lay in bed and say, your turn. Because no, I should take responsibility and feel this. And so it doesn't mean it's in any way condescending. Pat Pike is my boss here at Biola, and I joyfully submit to Pat Pike's leadership. But she's a woman and I'm a man, so if Pat Pike and I go out to lunch to talk business and we come out and it's a torrential downpour, I'm not going to say, Pat, go get the car. I'm going to have a sense of, man, and it's not because she'll melt if she goes in the rain or she can't get the car herself. She does it all the time. But I think as a man, I should have a sense of a responsibility for a woman in a way that is taking that leadership. So I don't think this awaits marriage or dating for men to feel as men toward women and women as women toward men. God made us men and women, and we should have a relational dynamic that is at work even before we get to committed relationships.
And my only comment to add is that, and again, we love these couples, we admire these couples, but we have bad days. I mean, it gets messy, and I tried to shepherd my teenage boys, and they look at me and they're like, Dad, oh, again with the biblical input with it. We were watching Sports Center. You had to pause it, and I mean, the first thing I noticed about Noreen was how pretty she was, and that I really was attracted to her. And I think the problem we have in our culture is, just because you're beautiful, I'll put up with all the garbage. And I think that's the problem. And I think men, we fall prey to that really quickly, is we'll put up with a lot if she's really attractive. And if you were to decrease her attractiveness, we would not put up with quite as much in the courting process.
I got to tell you, when I see Donna ministering like she is tonight, and just sitting with a woman ministering on campus, praying with her, I just find that very attractive. And she finds it bizarre that I do actually sometimes,
But you're leaving room for physical attraction. I mean, the Song of Solomon is two people who are physically attracted to each other and want each other sexually. So I totally buy what you're saying, Eric, completely. I want to leave room for marry a person that physically you are attracted to them. I do think that that's important.
But I think character can make someone physically attractive.
Yes, exactly. And the longer you love... You gotta know, Donna and I and Noreen were buddies in college. Long before Tim ever showed up on the scene. We really were. But yes, it's just safe to assume we're gonna be enculturated into shallow, almost entirely physical. When I think of when I was 17 and what I really wanted in a wife, it was so trivial. It really was. And I know these couples will all agree, there is a love now in our relationship where, say, if Donna was in an accident and was disfigured in some way, look, we don't believe in fate. I can say things like, oh, don't say that, it might happen. No, it won't happen. I can't speak anything into existence, all right? Say Donna were disfigured in an accident, it wouldn't change my love for her, and I would say my attraction for her either. There's something so enduring now at this point in our relationship, so that some of the things I was really attracted to when we were 16 in high school, when her locker was across from mine, are in perspective now, and they weren't at that time. And so I do agree with that, but just it's safe to assume we're going to be so overemphasizing Hollywood's latest version of what's attractive. But yes, we met this couple in their 90s. Were you going to talk about that? The wife studied with C.S. Lewis, and she's actually the daughter of one of the great preachers of the last century, Martin Lloyd-Jones, and she's just amazing. And so we said, how do you, when you counsel young people, how do you know if it's the one? And she listed godliness and all these things, and then she finally goes, and at the end of the day, you need to just fancy him. And it was a great conclusion,
I was just going to say that you did tell me when we were 17 that I'd be pretty even if I had mud on my face. So, but yeah, what Noreen just said, that, how did you put it? Character
can make someone physically attractive.
Yeah, and commitment. And love over time, I think, makes someone attractive. I look at my grandparents who are 90 years old, and I really can tell by the way that they still look at each other that my grandpa thinks my grandma's pretty, and she thinks he's cute. She even tells him that he's cute. They have they just celebrated Valentine's Day, 68 years of marriage. Yeah. And they are attracted to one another in a different kind of a way than what you think of as attraction, because they're 90. But when someone has been your partner that long and you love them, they are attractive to you. None of us look the way we did 20 years ago when we got married. But our marriages...
A lot of it.
You had hair just 3 years ago.
You did.
But anyway, all I'm saying is that our attraction to one another is so much deeper than physical, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it only takes getting to the end of the honeymoon for the marrying because somebody's pretty or good looking to wear off. Right. By the time you've woken up next to the next person and you've got sleepy in your eyes and drool coming out your mouth all over your pillow and your hair's all messed up and you've got morning breath, well then, just because you're cute wears off real quick. Even by the end of our honeymoon, by that last day, we were in Mexico. We won't name names, but there was Montezuma's revenge involved. It was not a pretty way to end the honeymoon.
Now you say it was involved. Now who was it involved with? Yeah, it can be. Our honeymoon, I got food poisoning at the JFK Hotel. Shish kebab, bad choice.
First night,
I got food poisoning. We are in St. John in the Virgin Islands, and I am shivering under covers with a fever and throwing up. And then Donna's the next day throwing up off the back of a sailboat because she wasn't handling it well. And then I had this weird combination of fresh fish, and my throat closed. At this romantic dinner, and I'm talking like Mickey Mouse. Hey, my mouth right there. And it was just reality really quick.
So the point is, it is important that there's physical attraction. If that's all there is, you need to run away. If there's a friendship and there's commitment and you're attracted to that person's character and personality, and then the physical attraction is involved in that, that's a good thing. And that's necessary even in a Christian marriage. You cannot remove that. Do we have time? We have one, because it's getting late. Go ahead.
Well, I don't think we have a right to anything but hell.
Yeah.
So I don't want to start by saying, yeah, we do have a right to this. What do I do with this right? I don't have a right for a wife that at all. I really don't think I have the right to anything but hell. And so it's all grace. And to have a gospel understanding that is able, Paul said to the Corinthians, I don't know if you know anything about Corinth, but bad. He said, I've betrothed you to one husband, Jesus, and I want to present you to him as a pure virgin. The Corinthians presented to Jesus as a pure virgin. That's how much he believed in the power of God. Not to make past sin entirely irrelevant, but to be able to restore and bring a beautiful purity and spiritual virginity that is just astounding when the gospel really takes root in our lives. And what an amazing way to display that grace is if there is sort of an unevenness in the degree to which someone has sinned sexually. If the gospel's taken over, love covers a multitude of sins, and you can actually practice and rehearse the gospel in light of past failures beautifully.
Amen. Yeah, that's what I was going to mention. I totally agree, Eric. I think that was perfectly said. And just to let you know, on Thursday night, there's going to be another event, and that's actually one of the topics that they're going to talk about is redemption and forgiveness and how to move on when there have been maybe issues in your past that you regret. So that they're going to delve into that quite a bit more.
Any last closing remarks as we kind of wrap up, and then do you want to maybe close in prayer?
Anything you guys want to?
I've so enjoyed this, and I hope you have too. And so much of the enjoyment is these people that I'm so blessed to have as friends and colleagues and co-laborers. And I hope you've noticed, and we didn't talk about it, but I hope you've noticed a sense of humor that actually comes from not taking yourself too seriously. And realizing, boy, we are in process. And if you're a perfectionist, forget it. It's not going to happen. So a sense of humor that comes from not taking yourself too seriously. So when you go on a honeymoon and you've got all these ideals of what it's going to be like, and you start throwing up the first day, well, we better not take ourselves too seriously, or our romantic ideals can become idols to us. And so I just love to be with these folks because there's this this attitude about it is, oh, here we go, we're all in process. And God is so patient with us. So let's be patient with each other.
And I think what you're seeing is a communication climate here. If we did not have a good communication climate with each other, then you start to think, okay, now that joke was maybe a bit of a dig, and do they respect? But because we work on our climates, it allows you to laugh a little bit and to be reminded, oh yeah, you don't have all the answers, and there's another perspective and stuff. So I think what you're seeing a little bit is, it doesn't just happen. You're attentive to the communication climate. It takes work. And these are people we care about, so we do the work of, hey, are we okay? Was that too much? It's checking in, acknowledgement, and those kind of things. Chris, want to close the prayer?
Yeah, let's stand. So let's pray. Father, we have come here tonight mostly hoping to sense and to know that you are here, and we have just been blessed by your faithfulness and by your presence. I pray for each person in here who desires to know you, to walk with you, to be with you, to be your child. Thank you for calling us your children. May you bless these individuals as they decide, Father, to walk with you, to know you. Be with them as they seek your will. Be with us as we as a community desire to walk with you and to be your children, to know you, and to encourage one another along the path. And may you go before us now. Thank you for an opportunity to be together. Lord, may you be given the glory and the praise as all your people call upon you and thanksgiving to your Son Jesus and what he's done. Father, thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.